The purple sky darkened as storm clouds gathered over the alien landscape. June checked his equipment one last time before securing the entrance to his research tent. He had been on Nexus 7 for nearly 3 months, and the planet's unpredictable weather still surprised him. This remote region, with its strange blue vegetation and unusual wildlife, was largely unexplored by humans, making it perfect for his xenobiology research. June wiped sweat from his forehead and looked at the twin suns sinking toward the horizon. The air felt heavy, electric. His weather scanner beeped a warning. Another atmospheric disturbance approaching, possibly worse than the one last week that had nearly destroyed his camp. Just what I needed, he muttered, securing the final anchor on his reinforced tent. The Earth Research Initiative had developed these special shelters for extreme planetary conditions, but even they had limits. As the wind picked up, June noticed something moving in the tall azure grass about 50 meters from camp. At first, he thought it might be one of the small six-legged creatures he'd been studying, but the movement pattern was different, more deliberate. He grabbed his binoculars and focused on the disturbance. Something, or someone, was stumbling toward his camp. June's heart rate quickened. According to all Earth surveys, this region was uninhabited. No settlements, human or alien, had been recorded within 1,000 kilometers. The figure collapsed into the grass just 20 meters from the tent. June hesitated only briefly before grabbing his emergency kit and rushing outside. The storm was intensifying, winds whipping the blue grass into a frenzy. Whatever was out there appeared to be in trouble. When he reached the fallen form, June froze in surprise. Lying in the grass was clearly an alien, humanoid in basic shape, but definitely not human. Her skin had a faint blue luminescence that pulsed gently, and delicate gill-like structures fluttered at her neck. She wore what appeared to be a fitted bodysuit made of unknown material. The alien's eyes fluttered open, 3 pupils within each iris expanding as they focused on him. She spoke, the sounds unlike anything June had heard before, musical, but with clicks and tones his human ears could barely process. A purple fluid seeped from a wound on her arm. The storm was growing more intense by the second, and June made a quick decision. Research protocols dictated minimal contact with newly discovered species, but he couldn't leave her injured in the coming storm. "I'm going to help you," he said, knowing she couldn't understand but hoping his tone conveyed his intention. He gestured toward his tent. "Shelter. Come." The alien seemed to understand his gestures, if not his words. She attempted to stand but stumbled. June carefully helped her up, noticing she was lighter than she looked, and guided her toward his tent. Inside, the alien looked around with obvious curiosity, while June activated his universal translator. The device would need time to process an entirely new language, but it might eventually allow for basic communication. June indicated for her to sit on his cot while he examined her injury. The wound wasn't deep, but the purple fluid, presumably blood, continued to seep from it. He pulled out his medical kit, showing her the antiseptic and bandages before using them. She watched him intently, but didn't resist as he cleaned and wrapped her wound. The storm outside grew louder, the tent walls flexing against the powerful gusts. The alien tensed at a particularly loud thunderclap. "It's okay," June said, pointing to the reinforced structure. "Safe." The translator beeped, indicating it had begun processing her language. June picked up the device and held it between them. "My name is June," he said clearly. "Can you understand me?" The translator hummed but produced no output yet. The alien tilted her head, considering him with those unusual triple pupilled eyes. She pointed to herself. "Haru," she said, the word clear despite her unusual vocal patterns. "Haru," June repeated, smiling. "I'm June." She nodded, seemingly pleased by this simple exchange. Outside, the storm howled, but inside the tent, a first contact was quietly taking place. Hours passed. June offered Haru water and some of his food rations, but she declined the latter, instead removing a small package from her own gear and consuming something that looked like blue gel. The translator gradually began to decipher basic patterns in her speech. By midnight, it could interpret simple phrases. "I study life forms," June explained slowly, pointing to his equipment. "Plants, animals." Haru's expression brightened with recognition. She pointed to herself, then to similar tools she carried in a pack. "Same," the translator interpreted. "I study life patterns." "You're a scientist?" June asked, surprised. The translator struggled but eventually produced, "Knowledge seeker, life connector." June learned that Haru came from a settlement beyond the northern mountains, a settlement Earth's preliminary surveys had completely missed. Her people, who called themselves the Nari, had been studying the planet's ecosystems for generations. "Why have we never encountered your people before?" June asked. Haru's answer came through the translator in fragments. "We watch, we study. Humans new, loud, disruptive. You've been observing us," June realized. "Since we arrived." Haru nodded. "Learning your ways, not ready for meeting. Until now." She gestured to her injury. "Accident, rock slide, lost equipment, then storm." "Lucky I found you," Jun said. Haru's expression changed in a way June couldn't interpret. "Not luck. Patterns. Connections." As the night wore on, they shared what they could through the improving but still limited translation. June learned that Haru was on a solo research expedition, much like himself, studying migration patterns of flying creatures in the region. "Your methods," Haru said, gesturing to June's collection of samples and analysis equipment. "Different from ours." "How do your people study?" June asked. Haru touched her temple. "We connect. We join. We understand from inside." The translator couldn't fully convey her meaning, but June sensed she was describing something profoundly different from human scientific methods. Morning came, but the storm continued unabated. June's communications equipment showed the disturbance had grown into a major system that might last days. They were effectively stranded together. Haru seemed unconcerned by their predicament. She examined June's research with obvious interest, sometimes making sounds that the translator interpreted as surprise or disagreement. "This plant," she said, pointing to a specimen June had been particularly proud of cataloging. "You see wrong." "Wrong. I've recorded its cellular structure, chemical composition, reproductive cycle." Haru shook her head. "Parts. You see parts, not whole." She made a gesture like weaving. "Connected to soil bacteria, connected to air particles, connected to water cycle. Cannot understand alone." June was both intrigued and slightly offended. Earth science has accomplished remarkable things using these methods. "Yes," Haru acknowledged, "but miss much. Miss music of life." That evening, as they shared another meal, June with his rations, Haru with her blue gel, she attempted to explain how her people approached science. The translator struggled with many concepts, but June gathered that the Nori didn't just observe ecosystems, they somehow experienced them directly. "When storm ends," Haru said, "I show you." "Show me what?" "How we do it. On my planet." She pointed to her head, then gestured widely. "Connect. Learn. Become." June wasn't sure what she meant, but he felt a spark of excitement. In his years as a xenobiologist, he had catalogued countless alien species, but he had never had the opportunity to learn from another intelligent species with its own scientific tradition. The storm continued for 2 more days. They passed the time comparing notes on their respective studies of Nexus 7's ecosystems. Despite the language barrier and their different approaches, June was impressed by Haru's knowledge. She identified relationships between species he hadn't noticed and predicted behaviors he had only begun to document. On the morning of the 4th day, June awoke to silence. The constant howl of the storm had finally ceased. Haru was already up, looking outside the tent entrance. "Storm finished," she said. Now I show you. June followed her outside. The landscape had been transformed by the storm. Some areas flattened, others rearranged, but the resilient blue vegetation was already beginning to straighten itself. Haru led him to a small clearing near the tent. She removed a delicate, organic-looking device from her pack. For beginners, she explained, holding it up. Experienced ones need no tools. What is it? June asked, both curious and cautious. Way to connect. To understand. She held it out to him. Try. June hesitated only briefly before accepting. Whatever happened next would certainly be the most important discovery of his career, and perhaps change how humans understood science itself. The device Haru placed on June's head was unlike any technology he had ever seen. It felt almost alive, adjusting itself to fit comfortably against his temples and the base of his skull. It was light, made of a material that seemed half organic, half technological. Relax, Haru instructed as she made final adjustments. First time is overwhelming. Do not fight it. June took a deep breath. They stood in the small clearing near his tent, surrounded by the blue vegetation of Nexus 7. The storm had passed, leaving the air fresh and still. What exactly will this do? He asked, feeling a flutter of nervousness. Show you how we learn, Haru said simply. How we understand life. She pressed something on the device, and June felt a gentle warmth spread across his scalp. Then, without warning, the world around him transformed. Colors intensified. Sounds he hadn't noticed before filled his ears. The subtle creaking of plant stems, the movement of tiny creatures in the soil, even the faint hum of energies he had no words for. But most startling was the sense of connection that suddenly blossomed in his mind. The blue grass wasn't just something he was looking at. He could feel it. He sensed how it drew nutrients from the soil, how it processed the light from the twin suns, how it communicated with other plants through chemical signals. The small insects moving among the stems weren't separate creatures, but part of a larger system that included the plants, the soil, and even the air. June gasped, overwhelmed by the input. Haru steadied him with a hand on his shoulder. Too much, she asked. It's incredible, he managed to say. I can feel everything. Haru nodded. This is how we learn. Not by taking apart, by joining. For the next hour, Haru guided him through this new way of experiencing the world. She showed him how to focus his awareness, moving from the broad ecosystem down to specific interactions between organisms. What might have taken him weeks of observation and analysis in the lab, he was experiencing directly. When she finally removed the device, Jum sat heavily on the ground, his mind reeling from the experience. That's how you do science? He asked in awe. Yes, we join the life web. We learn by being part of it. Haru settled beside him. Your way, taking samples, looking at pieces, gives some knowledge. Our way gives understanding. But how do you record what you learn? How do you share it with others? Haru touched her temple. We store knowledge here. We share through connection. She demonstrated by touching her forehead with 3 fingers, then extending them toward him. Mind to mind. But for those without the gift, we have this. She held up the device. Neural bridge. Over the next several days, June and Haru established a routine. In the mornings, they would use the neural bridge to explore the ecosystem together, Haru teaching June how to interpret the vast web of sensations. In the afternoons, they would return to his tent where June would demonstrate human scientific methods, analyzing samples, recording data, creating taxonomies. Your people are very ordered, Haru observed one afternoon as she watched him catalog specimens. Everything in boxes, everything separated. It helps us make sense of complexity, June explained. We break things down to understand how they work. But when you break, you lose connections. Haru picked up one of his sample containers, a small insect-like creature preserved in clear solution. This one, in life, it talks to soil bacteria. They help each other. In your box, it is alone. silent. June considered this, but without detailed analysis of individual components. How do your people develop technologies? Medical treatments? How do you solve problems? Haru smiled. We have technology. She touched her neural device. We have medicine. But they grow from understanding the whole. When something is sick, we do not just fix the broken part. We restore balance to the system. One evening, as they shared a meal under the alien stars, June asked about Haru's society. How many of your people live on this planet? How long have you been here? The translator processed her response. Many settlements. Small groups. Spread wide. We came here. 12 generations passed. From where? Haru pointed to a distant star barely visible in the night sky. Homeworld. Too crowded. Too changed. Like Earth, Jum said with a nod. That's why we're exploring other planets too. But you bring Earth with you, Haru observed. Your bases, your plants, your animals. Is that wrong? Haru considered before answering. Not wrong. Different path. We adapt to new worlds. Become part of them. You change worlds to be like Earth. The conversation continued late into the night, both of them fascinated by the different approaches their species had taken to science, technology, and expansion. The next morning, Jun received the first transmission from his research base in days. The storm had disrupted communications, and his team was concerned about his safety. They were sending a transport to check on him. My colleagues are coming, he told Haru. Other human scientists. Haru's expression changed, her 3 pupil eyes contracting slightly. Many humans. Just a small team, June assured her. They're worried about me because of the storm. Will they understand? This? She gestured between them. June hadn't considered how his colleagues might react to finding him working with a previously unknown intelligent species. The protocols for first contact were strict. Technically, he had already violated several of them by bringing Haru into his tent and using her technology. They might be surprised at first, he admitted, but they're scientists. They'll be interested in what we can learn from each other. Haru didn't seem convinced. My people have watched humans. Some are curious, yes. Some are fearful of difference. Do you want to leave before they arrive? June asked, suddenly worried she might disappear back to her settlement. Haru considered this, then shook her head. No, too important. Our ways should meet, but slowly, carefully. The transport arrived the next day. A small hovercraft carrying Min and Da, 2 colleagues from June's research team. Their shock at finding him with Haru was evident, but Jun had prepared for this moment. This is Haru, he said calmly. She's a scientist from a settlement beyond the northern mountains. Her people have been on Nexus 7 for generations. Min and Da exchanged looks of disbelief. A native intelligent species. Min stepped forward, her scientific curiosity overcoming her shock. How is this possible? Our surveys showed no signs of technological civilization. Because you looked for the wrong signs, Haru said through the translator. Our technology grows, joins with nature, does not stand apart. Day remained more cautious. June, protocol requires any first contact to be reported immediately to Earth Command. We should transport both of you back to base. June had anticipated this response. Haru has been teaching me how her people study ecosystems. It's revolutionary, Da. They have a completely different approach to science that could change everything we think we know about this planet. What kind of approach? Min asked, her interest clearly piqued. June looked at Haru, who nodded her permission. He picked up the neural bridge device. They connect directly to the ecosystem. They experience it rather than just observing it. Min's eyes widened with excitement, but Da looked skeptical. You've been using alien technology, he asked, concerned, without any safety protocols, without any analysis. I understand your concern, Jun said, but this isn't dangerous technology. It's a teaching tool. And what I've learned in the past few days is more valuable than months of conventional research. After much discussion, they reached a compromise. June and Haru would return to the research base, but as invited guests rather than as a first contact emergency. Haru would be introduced as a scientific consultant, giving her the opportunity to demonstrate her people's methods in a controlled environment. As they prepared to leave, Haru took a moment alone with June. "Your friends are still unsure," she observed. "Min is excited. Day is cautious. That's normal for humans encountering something new." "And what about you?" Haru asked. "Are you excited or cautious?" June considered the question. "Both," he admitted. "What I've experienced through your neural bridge is extraordinary, but it also challenges everything I thought I knew about how science works." "Good science should always question," Haru said, her lips curving in a slight smile. "That is same for both our peoples." The journey to the research base took several hours. Haru watched the landscape passing below them with evident interest, occasionally pointing out features June's team had never noticed: symbiotic relationships between plant species, migration patterns of flying creatures, even subtle energy flows in certain regions. "How can you see all this just by looking?" Min asked, fascinated. "Once you have connected, you never truly disconnect," Haru explained. "The patterns remain visible." As they approached the human settlement, Jun felt a mixture of anticipation and concern. He believed in the value of what Haru could teach them, but he also knew how resistant scientific institutions could be to radically different paradigms. The base came into view, a collection of white structures arranged in a precise grid, standing in stark contrast to the wild blue landscape around it. Solar arrays and communication towers rose above the buildings, and a perimeter fence surrounded the entire complex. Haru studied it with interest. "So ordered," she observed, "like your thinking." "This is just the beginning," Joan told her. "If we can show my colleagues what I've experienced, this could change how humans study not just this planet, but all planets, including Earth." The transport began its descent toward the landing pad. A small group had assembled to meet them, including Director Kim, the head of the research initiative. His expression was unreadable as he watched their approach. "Are you ready?" June asked Haru. She nodded, her blue luminescent skin pulsing slightly faster, a sign of excitement or nervousness. June couldn't yet tell. "Yes," she said. "Time to show your people how we do it on my planet." The transport touched down on the landing pad with a soft hum. June led Haru toward the welcoming committee, feeling both proud and nervous. Director Kim stood at the front, his face neutral but his posture stiff. "Director Kim," Jun said with a formal bow. "This is Haru. She's a scientist from a settlement beyond the northern mountains." Director Kim studied Haru with intense curiosity. Her blue luminescent skin glowed softly in the shadow of the transport. The gill-like structures at her neck fluttered gently as she breathed the slightly processed air of the human base. "Welcome to Earth Research Base 7, Director Kim said slowly, allowing the translator to process his words. Haru placed 3 fingers to her forehead, then extended them toward the director, a greeting gesture from her people. "Thank you for receiving me, Leader Kim." The director didn't correct her on his title. "June tells us you have been on this planet for generations. This is unexpected news. My people prefer quiet existence," Haru explained. "We watch, we learn, we rarely interfere." Director Kim nodded stiffly. "We have much to discuss. Please, come inside." The small group walked from the landing pad toward the main research building. June noticed how Haru studied everything: the rigid layout of the buildings, the uniform clothing of the staff, the carefully maintained patches of earth plants around the common areas. In the main conference room, Director Kim didn't waste time. "June says you've shared some sort of neural technology with him. I need to understand exactly what this technology does and how it works before we can proceed with any formal exchange." Haru placed her neural bridge device on the table. "This helps beginners connect to living networks. to understand by joining rather than separating. And how exactly does it connect? Asked Wu, the base's lead technology specialist. She leaned forward, clearly fascinated by the organic-looking device. It creates temporary paths between your mind and the living energy of plants, animals, soil, Haru explained. Safe, temporary, educational only. Director Kim frowned. You're describing a direct neural interface with alien biology. The safety concerns are significant. I've used it multiple times. Joan interjected. It's completely safe, and the scientific potential is extraordinary. You violated at least 7 protocols by using unanalyzed alien technology. Director Kim said sharply. We have no idea what long-term effects this could have. Haru tilted her head. Your concern is reasonable. My people tested for many years before young ones could use. Perhaps your scientists examined first. Wu immediately volunteered. I can analyze its operation. Non-invasively, of course. Director Kim considered, then nodded. Acceptable. But no human uses this device again until we understand it fully. The meeting continued for hours. Haru patiently answered questions about her people, their settlements, their technology. She explained how the Nori had intentionally kept their presence minimal, living in harmony with the planet rather than reshaping it. We were concerned when humans arrived, she admitted. Your methods change environments quickly. Create imbalance. We follow strict environmental protocols. Director Kim said defensively. Yes, but you still see world as collection of resources, not living network. Haru gestured to the window, toward the fenced perimeter. You build walls. Between you and world. Between ideas. Between disciplines. 3 days later, Wu completed her analysis of the neural bridge device. The research team gathered in the lab as she presented her findings. It's remarkable technology, Wu said, her eyes bright with excitement. The device doesn't directly interface with the brain as we initially thought. Instead, it enhances natural sensory capabilities we already possess, but don't typically use. What do you mean? Director Kim asked. Humans have latent abilities to sense electrical fields, subtle chemical signals, even some forms of radiation. This device amplifies those capabilities and provides a framework for interpreting the information. Wu looked at Haru with newfound respect. It's not invasive at all. It's more like putting on glasses that let you see new colors. And the safety concerns, Director Kim pressed. Minimal. It creates no permanent changes to neural structure. The only potential issue is psychological. The experience is intense and could be disorienting. Director Kim still hesitated. And what exactly is the scientific value? Beyond the subjective experience. June stepped forward. Director, in 3 days with the neural bridge, I identified 5 new symbiotic relationships in the local ecosystem that we missed in 3 months of conventional study. I understood migration patterns we've been tracking incorrectly. I saw how the soil chemistry changes in response to the movement of the smaller moon. Haru added, and this is just beginning learning. Children's level. After much discussion, Director Kim reluctantly authorized a limited research program. June would lead a small team working with Haru to explore applications of Nari scientific methods. Wu would join as technical liaison, adapting human equipment to work alongside the neural technology. The first formal session took place the next morning. June, Wu, and Min gathered in a small lab where Haru had set up her neural bridge device. Who wishes to try first? Haru asked. Wu immediately volunteered. Haru carefully placed the device on her head, adjusting it to fit properly. Remember, June advised, don't try to analyze everything at once. Let the experience flow. Wu nodded, then gasped as Haru activated the device. Her eyes widened, and her hands reached out, as if touching invisible objects in the air. I can feel them, she whispered. The plants in the sample chamber, they're communicating with each other. Min went next, with similar reactions of wonder and excitement. When it was over, Both scientists bombarded Haru with questions about what they had experienced. This could revolutionize our understanding of ecosystem dynamics, Min said enthusiastically. The connections I felt between species, we've been studying them as separate entities, but they're functioning as a unified system. Wu was already thinking of applications. If we could modify our scanning equipment to detect these energy patterns, maybe integrate some principles from the neural bridge. Over the next few weeks, the collaboration deepened. Haru taught them the basics of Nari science, how to perceive connections between living things, how to interpret the complex energy patterns of the ecosystem, how to recognize imbalances before they became visible to conventional methods. In return, the human scientists shared their analytical techniques, their technology for recording and sharing data, their methods for testing hypotheses. Each approach had strengths the other lacked. Your instruments see details my people miss, Haru acknowledged one day as she examined electron microscope images of a soil sample. Small parts, individual cells, molecular structures. But we miss the big picture, Jun replied. The connections between systems that you perceive naturally. Wu became particularly invested in bridging the two approaches. She spent long hours in the lab, developing interfaces between human sensors and the principles behind Nori neural perception. What if we could create a hybrid system? She suggested during one meeting. Something that combines the direct experience of Nori science with the precision and recordability of human technology. Director Kim, initially skeptical, began to see the potential. The research team was making discoveries at an unprecedented rate, identifying new species, understanding complex relationships, predicting changes in the ecosystem with remarkable accuracy. Not everyone embraced the collaboration, however. Some researchers kept their distance, uncomfortable with methods that seemed too subjective, too alien. A few openly questioned whether the Nari approach could truly be called science at all. Where is the experimental control? Demanded Ta, the lead botanist, during a heated research meeting. Where is the statistical analysis? You're asking us to accept findings based on feelings. Not feelings, Haru corrected patiently. Direct perception, different from emotion. But how can we verify your perceptions? Ta pressed. How can we know they're accurate? Jun intervened. That's exactly what we're working on, Ta. Wu's new sensors can detect many of the same patterns Haru perceives. We're developing methods to quantify and verify these perceptions. Despite the resistance, the collaboration continued to yield results. The research team mapped previously unknown underground mycelia networks that connected distant plant communities. They discovered how certain insect species served as living communication channels between different parts of the ecosystem. They began to understand the planet not as a collection of separate habitats, but as a single interconnected living system. One morning, Jun found Haru standing at the edge of the research base, looking out at the wild landscape beyond the perimeter fence. Her expression seemed troubled. "Everything okay?" he asked, joining her. "I received message from my settlement," she said. "Concerning news." "What kind of news?" Haru turned to face him. "Changes in forest regions, plants dying, animals moving away, balance shifting." "Natural changes?" Jun asked. "No, too fast, too wrong." She looked back at the landscape. "My people have seen this pattern before. On Old World, before we came here." "What is it?" "We do not have name. Breakdown of connections, systems failing to communicate." She turned to Jun, her triple pupilled eyes intense. "Your people would call it disease, but not just one organism sick. Whole network sick." Jun felt a chill. "How serious is it? If not stopped, spreads. Changes everything." Haru looked directly at him. "This is why I came to this region. Tracking early signs. Then storm came." "We need to tell Director Kim," Jun said, already turning toward the main building. Haru placed a hand on his arm. "Wait. Must understand first. Your science and mine, together. Her skin pulsed with a stronger blue light, a sign of strong emotion among her people. This problem too big for one approach alone. June nodded slowly. A true collaboration. Yes, Haru agreed. Now we test if our peoples can really work together. The emergency alarm echoed through the research base. June rushed toward the main lab, joining other scientists gathering around the central display screen. Director Kim stood at the front. His face grim as satellite images appeared on the screen. The affected area has doubled in size since yesterday, Director Kim announced, pointing to a dark patch spreading across the western continent. Our containment efforts are failing. Haru studied the images, her skin pulsing with a faint blue glow that June had learned indicated concern. As I feared, the disconnection spreads quickly. It had been 3 weeks since Haru first reported the ecological disturbance. What began as subtle changes in plant communication patterns had developed into something much more visible and alarming. Entire forest regions were showing signs of stress. Leaves turning brown, flowering cycles disrupted, animal populations fleeing the affected areas. The latest soil samples show increased toxicity, Min reported, bringing up charts on a second screen. Something is disrupting the nutrient cycle at a fundamental level. And our chemical treatments? Director Kim asked. Wu shook her head. No effect. Whatever this is, it doesn't respond to any conventional interventions. The room fell silent. The human scientific team had tried everything in their standard protocols. Targeted fungicides, soil amendments, even controlled burns to create fire breaks around the affected areas. Nothing had slowed the spread. We need to understand what we're fighting, Jun said finally. And I don't think we can do that with microscopes and chemical analysis alone. All eyes turned to Haru, who had been working alongside the human scientists, but mostly in an advisory role. Director Kim had remained reluctant to fully incorporate Nori methods into the official response. You believe your neural approach could provide insights we're missing? Director Kim asked, his tone carefully neutral. Yes, Haru said simply. This is not ordinary disease. This is communication breakdown in living network. To understand, one must join the network. The director rubbed his forehead, visibly torn between his scientific caution and the urgent need for solutions. The risk. With respect, Director, Jun interrupted, the risk of doing nothing is far greater. At the current rate of spread, this disturbance will reach our base within 2 months and Haru's settlement in 3. After a moment's consideration, Director Kim nodded. What do you propose? Jun looked at Haru, who stepped forward. We must go to edge of affected area, she explained. Use neural bridge to connect directly. Feel what is happening in soil, in plants, in air. I'll go with Haru, Jun volunteered immediately. Me too, Wu added, surprising everyone. The technology specialist had become increasingly interested in Nori methods, but had maintained a scientist's cautious distance until now. Director Kim considered their proposal. Very well. But I want you in full environmental protection suits, and I want constant communication. At the first sign of danger, you pull out. Understood. They departed at dawn the next day. The small research vessel carried Jun, Haru, Wu, and a pilot toward the edge of the affected zone. As they flew over the landscape, the contrast became starkly visible. Healthy blue vegetation giving way to sickly brown patches that grew larger and more numerous until they merged into a continuous dead zone. The pilot landed them half a kilometer from the visible edge of the disturbance. This is as close as I'm comfortable getting, he explained. Air readings are still normal here, but they deteriorate rapidly as you move forward. Jun and Wu donned their environmental suits while Haru watched with interest. Her people had natural resistance to many environmental toxins, and her body could filter the air more efficiently than human lungs. These make you safe but separate you further from environment, she observed. Will be harder to connect through these barriers. We'll manage, Jun assured her, checking Wu's seals before allowing the technician to check his. They walked toward the edge of the disturbance, carrying sample kits and monitoring equipment. Haru moved slightly ahead, her triple pupilled eyes scanning the changing landscape with an expert's attention. "Stop here," she said when they reached the transition zone where healthy plants gave way to sickly ones. She knelt and placed her hand directly on the soil. "This is where we will connect." Jun and Wu set up a small portable lab, deploying sensors and beginning the standard analysis protocols. Meanwhile, Haru removed her neural bridge device from its protective case. "Ready?" she asked them. Jun nodded, but Wu hesitated. "How will this work through our suits?" she asked. "Won't they block the connection?" He helped position the neural bridge on Jun's helmet, making adjustments to strengthen the connection. When she activated it, Jun gasped despite being prepared for the experience. The sensations were different from his previous sessions with the device. Instead of the rich, interconnected web of life he had experienced before, he felt something fractured and dissonant. It was like listening to a beautiful symphony where more and more instruments were playing out of tune. "I can feel it," he reported to the others. "The connections are breaking down. It's like static interrupting the communication between organisms." Haru nodded grimly. "Yes, the language of life is being disrupted." When it was Wu's turn with the device, her reaction was even stronger. As a technology specialist, she immediately recognized patterns in the disruption. "This isn't random," she said excitedly after removing the device. "The interference has a specific frequency. It's almost like an electromagnetic pulse targeted at biological systems." They collected samples and data for hours, alternating between conventional analysis and sessions with the neural bridge. By mid-afternoon, they had begun to form a hypothesis. "I think it's related to electrical signaling," Wu explained as they packed up their equipment. "Plants and fungi communicate through chemical signals, but also through weak electrical impulses. Something is creating interference in those signals. But what could generate that kind of interference across such a large area?" Jun wondered. Haru had been quiet for some time, processing what she had experienced through the neural bridge. Now she looked up, her expression troubled. "The pattern feels familiar," she said slowly. "Like something my ancestors described from homeworld." "A natural phenomenon?" Jun asked. "No. Result of technology. Unintended consequence." She hesitated. "Your base, how does it power systems?" "Standard fusion generators," Wu replied. "Clean energy, minimal environmental impact." "And communication systems. Low-frequency radio for local communications, quantum entanglement for off-planet transmissions," Wu explained. "Again, minimal environmental footprint." Haru shook her head. "Not direct impact. Interaction effect. When your technology mixes with planet's natural energies." Back at the base, they presented their findings to Director Kim and the research team. Wu had developed a theory, combining Haru's insights with her technical expertise. "We believe the disruption is caused by a resonance effect," she explained, displaying complex waveform graphs on the main screen. "Our base's power systems are generating a specific electromagnetic frequency, normally harmless, but on this planet, it's interacting with the natural mineral deposits in the western region. The local geology is amplifying the signal," Jun added, "creating a disruptive field that interferes with the bioelectrical communication between organisms." Ta, the skeptical botanist, frowned. "You're suggesting our base is accidentally creating some kind of biological jamming signal." "Exactly," Wu confirmed. "And as we've increased power usage for new research projects, the effect has grown stronger and spread farther." Director Kim looked troubled. "If you're right, the solution would be to shut down the base." "Not necessarily," Haru interjected. "The pattern can be corrected. Balanced." She moved to the display and began drawing with her finger, creating a complex waveform. "This pattern, if generated alongside your existing signals, would create harmony, not disruption." A counter-signal, Wu realized, her eyes widening. "We could use modified transmitters to generate this waveform, neutralizing the disruptive effect." "That's a massive undertaking," Director Kim pointed out. We'd need to deploy transmitters across hundreds of square kilometers. Not if we use the planet's natural amplification to our advantage, Jun suggested. The same mineral deposits that are spreading the disruption could spread the solution. The room erupted in discussion, scientists proposing and debating various approaches. For the first time, there was no division between human science and Nori science. The two approaches had merged into a single collaborative effort to solve the crisis. Will be weaker, Haru acknowledged, but still possible. Device creates field that can penetrate thin barriers. Over the next week, they developed a plan. Wu designed modified transmitters that could generate Haru's harmonic pattern. Jun mapped the key locations where they should be placed to maximize the natural amplification effect of the local geology. The Nori scientist used the neural bridge to fine-tune the frequency patterns, ensuring they would restore rather than further disrupt the biological communications. When the first prototype transmitter was ready, they tested it at the edge of the affected zone. Jun, Wu, and Haru returned to their original testing site, setting up the device amid the sickly vegetation. If this works, we should see immediate changes in the communication patterns, Haru explained, as Wu made final adjustments to the transmitter. When they activated it, nothing visible happened at first. But when Haru used the neural bridge to check the effect, her skin brightened with excitement. "It works," she exclaimed. "The static is clearing. The connections are beginning to reestablish." Jun took his turn with the device and confirmed her assessment. Where before he had felt dissonance and disruption, now he could sense the faint beginnings of reconnection, like instruments slowly returning to harmony. "It will take time for the visible effects to show," Haru cautioned, "but the healing has begun." They returned to the base triumphant. Within days, a full-scale implementation plan was approved. Teams began constructing transmitters and identifying deployment locations. For the first time since the crisis began, there was hope. In the lab late one evening, Jun found Wu still working, making adjustments to the transmitter design. "You should rest," he suggested. "Tomorrow will be busy." Wu looked up, her eyes bright with excitement, despite her obvious fatigue. "I can't stop thinking about the implications of what we've discovered. This isn't just about solving a crisis, Jun. It's about a whole new way of understanding ecosystems." "A hybrid approach," Jun agreed, "combining the best of both our sciences." "Exactly." Wu gestured to her workstation, where diagrams showed the integration of human technology with Nori perception principles. "Neither of us could have solved this alone. We needed both perspectives." Later, walking back to his quarters, Jun found Haru standing at the perimeter fence, looking out at the night sky. "Thank you," he said simply, joining her. "Your knowledge saved us. Not my knowledge alone," she corrected gently. "Our knowledge together. This is how it should be." 6 months had passed since the deployment of the harmonic transmitters. Jun stood at the edge of what had once been a dead zone, now vibrant with renewed life. The blue vegetation had returned, growing even more densely than before. Small six-legged creatures scurried through the underbrush, and flying organisms with translucent wings darted between the tall stems. Haru knelt beside a particularly vigorous plant cluster, her hand gently touching the soil. "The network is strong again," she said, her skin glowing with a pleased blue luminescence, "even stronger than before. More connected." "The transmitters didn't just neutralize the disruption," Jun observed. "They somehow enhanced the natural communication patterns." "Yes, like how broken bone heals stronger at break point." Haru stood, brushing soil from her hands. "Life adapts, builds new paths, becomes more resilient." They walked together through the restored landscape, taking readings and samples as part of their ongoing monitoring program. The success of the transmitter network had exceeded all expectations. Within weeks, the dying vegetation had begun to recover. Within months, the ecosystem was showing signs of not just recovery, but enhanced vitality. "Director Kim wants a full report for Earth Command by next week," Jun mentioned as they worked. They're sending officials to evaluate what happened here. Are they concerned? Haru asked. Actually, they're excited. What we've accomplished here, combining human and Nori science to solve a crisis neither could have addressed alone. It's unprecedented. The sound of an approaching vehicle interrupted their conversation. A transport moved toward them across the blue landscape, carrying the newest additions to the research team. Since the crisis, interest in the collaboration had spread throughout the human scientific community. Researchers from Earth and other colonies had requested assignments to Nexus 7 to learn the hybrid methodology. The transport stopped nearby, and 3 figures emerged. Wu led the group, now serving as the official liaison between human technology and Nori science. Behind her came a human scientist Jun didn't recognize, and to his surprise, another Nori. Jun, Haru, Wu called out, waving. Meet our newest team members. This is Dr. Jin from Earth's Advanced Ecological Institute, and this is Ta from Haru's settlement. The new Nori stepped forward, performing the traditional greeting gesture toward Jun. I have heard much about your work, Ta said through a translator similar to the one Haru had first used. Many of my people wish to learn this new combined way of knowledge-seeking. This was a significant development. Until now, Haru had been the only Nori working directly with the human team. Her people had remained cautiously distant, watching the collaboration but not actively participating. What changed their minds? Jun asked as they walked back to the transport together. Success, Haru said simply. My people value harmony with natural world above all. When they saw how our combined methods restored balance faster and better than either approach alone, many became interested. The council has approved a formal exchange program. Wu added, 5 more Nori scientists will join us next month, and 3 of our team will visit Haru's settlement to learn their methods directly. Back at the research base, the changes were immediately visible. What had once been a rigidly organized human facility had evolved into something more organic. The formerly strict grid layout had been softened, with new structures built in curved patterns that mimicked natural forms. Gardens of native blue vegetation grew between buildings, and the perimeter fence had been replaced with a living boundary of symbiotic plants that provided protection without isolation. Inside the main research building, Director Kim was meeting with a planning committee in the central chamber. Large displays showed designs for a new kind of scientific institute. Ah, perfect timing, Director Kim said when he spotted Jun and Haru. We were just reviewing the final plans for the Harmony Institute. The displays showed an entirely new facility to be built halfway between the human base and the nearest Nori settlement. Unlike the current base, the design integrated completely with the natural environment, using living structures alongside technological ones. Earth Command has approved the full funding request. Director Kim continued, unable to hide his excitement. Construction begins next month. This will be the first joint scientific institution of its kind, designed from the ground up to support both human and Nori research methodologies. Jun studied the plans with growing appreciation. Research labs with both human analytical equipment and Nori neural interfaces. Living quarters designed to accommodate the needs of both species. Education spaces where the 2 approaches to science could be taught side by side. And you too, Director Kim said, looking at Jun and Haru, have been nominated to serve as the first co-directors, if you're willing. Jun looked at Haru in surprise. She seemed equally startled by the offer. I would be honored, Jun said after a moment. As would I, Haru added, her skin pulsing with a bright blue that indicated happiness. Later that evening, as the twin suns set over the restored landscape, Jun and Haru sat outside his quarters, discussing the future of their work. When I first found you during that storm, Jun reflected, I never imagined we'd end up here. Connection creates unexpected paths, Haru replied, like life itself. I've been thinking about Earth, Jun said, about how we could apply what we've learned here. Our ecosystems are struggling after centuries of disruption. The harmony transmitters, the neural interface techniques, They could help restore balance. Would your people accept such methods? Haru asked. Some of your scientists still resist connection approach. Some do, Jun acknowledged. But more and more are recognizing its value, especially the younger researchers like Wu. They see that we don't have to choose between analytical precision and holistic understanding. We can have both. A small group of researchers passed by, a mix of humans, and Nori engaged in animated discussion. In the months since the crisis, such scenes had become increasingly common. The initial barriers of language and methodology were breaking down as each species learned from the other. I received message from Council today, Haru said after the group had passed. More settlements have voted to join exchange program. Not just scientists now. Artists, historians, philosophers. That's wonderful news, Jun said. Yes, but some still fear too much contact, Haru admitted. Worry we lose our ways, become too human. We have the same concerns, Jun assured her. But I think we're creating something new here, not human science or Nori science, but a third path that honors both traditions. The next morning, Jun joined Wu in her laboratory where she was training new researchers in the hybrid methodology she had developed. On one side of the room, conventional human equipment, microscopes, spectrometers, computer models, analyzed samples from the restored region. On the other side, modified neural bridges allowed researchers to experience the same samples directly. The key is integration, Wu was explaining to the attentive group. Neither approach alone gives us the complete picture. The neural experience tells us how systems connect and communicate. The analytical data tells us the precise mechanisms and components. Jun watched with pride as the team worked. Humans and Nori moved between the two sides of the lab with growing comfort, each learning to value the other's perspective. Outside, a transport arrived carrying materials for the new institute. The construction would bring even more humans to Nexus 7, and with them would come new challenges for the collaboration. But Jun felt confident that the foundation they had built was strong. That afternoon, he and Haru met with a group of Earth officials who had arrived to evaluate the program. The visitors were clearly impressed by what they had already seen, but their questions revealed lingering concerns. This collaboration has produced remarkable results here, said the lead official. But how applicable is it to other worlds? To Earth itself? Not every planet will have a native intelligent species to teach us their methods. The specific techniques may vary, Jun acknowledged, but the principle remains the same. We don't have to choose between detailed analysis and holistic understanding. We can develop tools that give us both. Like this, Haru added, activating a display that showed Wu's newest invention. A portable sensor array that combined conventional detection methods with principles derived from the neural bridge. Works without Nori help. Gives humans some of same perception abilities. The officials examined the device with interest. And your educational program? Another official asked. How do you plan to train new researchers in these hybrid methods? The Harmony Institute will include a full teaching center, Jun explained. Students from both our peoples will learn side by side, each gaining proficiency in both approaches. We already have more applicants than spaces, Haru added, many young ones eager to learn new way. After the meeting, as the officials departed to tour the restoration zone, Jun and Haru walked to the edge of the base where the boundary between human territory and the wild landscape had grown increasingly blurred. Will it work? Haru asked quietly. Will our peoples truly learn to see through each other's eyes? Not perfectly, Jun admitted. Not all at once. But we've made a start. And the next generation, they won't know any other way. For them, these won't be human methods or Nori methods. Just good science. In the distance, the outline of the new institute was taking shape as planning markers were placed for the foundation. Within a year, it would be a thriving center of collaborative research. Within 5 years, if their plan succeeded, similar institutes would be established on other worlds where humans had settled. I never expected to become a bridge between worlds, Jun said. I was just a researcher trying to understand plants. Haru's skin glowed with gentle amusement. Sometimes the greatest discoveries happen when we let others into our tents. They stood together as the twin suns began their descent, casting long shadows across the landscape of Nexus 7. Behind them lay the human base, ahead the wild beauty of the alien world, and between them, the promise of a new way forward that honored both. The end.